somewhere that SARS number 19 expanded the documentation requirements for both compilations and reviews. What exactly does that mean?
Becky, it's always been an interesting issue with documentation, particularly for compilations, because if you read SARS 1 literally, there were no documentation requirements associated with the compilation. There were documentation requirements for a review, but not for a compilation. The reality is, the ethics rules always required that jobs be planned and supervised. And the only way you can demonstrate you did that would be by creating some documentation. So there always had to be documentation for compilations, but SARS 1 never addressed that issue. In the review area, the documentation requirements had to do with the performance of inquiry, had to do with the performance of analytics, had to do with the rep letter, and had to demonstrate that you were independent. So there was always incorporated documentation requirements for reviews. What SARS-19 did was it, for want of a better way of saying it, it took a stab at some documentation requirements for compilations, and it actually lists 3. Let me just refer to the 3. 1 is you must get an engagement letter. We talked about that earlier. 2, any findings or any unusual items that the outside accountant may have identified in the performance of a compilation now needs to be documented. In the past, again, the best practice would have been to document it, but now it's a requirement to document that. And the third is any communications made to the client, verbally or in writing, associated with fraud or illegal acts have to also be documented. So we've got 3 specific documentation requirements for compilations that were not there before. Having said that, you probably still need some additional documentation in order to demonstrate that the job was planned properly and was supervised properly. And what we recommend is that there be a minimum work program that identifies the steps that were done, that there be at minimum a sign-off sheet of some sort that indicates that you've done some things to understand the client, understand the business, understand the accounting practices, etc. We think that needs to be in the work papers. And we also think the financial statements, and if there are notes, the notes should be in the work papers, in the documentation, with appropriate sign-offs, indicate the accounting firm read the financial statements to determine if they're free from obvious material error. So there's probably some other pieces of documentation you want to have to make sure that jobs are properly planned and supervised. In the review literature, the documentation that was in the original SARS standard is the identical documentation that's in SARS-19, with one exception, the exception being that you must create expectations for your analytics that was not in the original SARS-1 document.